welcome to the latest episode of the Best Fleets to Drive For podcast. And I think I said episode of the Best Fleets to Drive For podcast. I'm Mark Morrell, co-creator of the Best Fleets to Drive For program, and I'm joined today by Trish Bethel, our program manager for Best Fleets to Drive For, and Thomas Banks from Nick Strimbu Incorporated. And our belief is that this is the August edition of the podcast. We record a bunch of these together, so it's never really clear when they're going to get published, but we think it's August. So if this is showing up in December, we have no real explanation why. So, all right, so let's get to it. Thomas, tell us a little bit about Nick Strimbu and what kind of things you do and how big the company is, where you're located, all of that stuff.
Okay, well, I mean, Nick Strimbu is a family-owned private company. It's been continuously owned by the founding family since 1926. So fourth generation is actually inside the building when it comes to ownership. So it's an incredibly rare company that we keep as far as the history of this company itself.
Sorry, 1926? So you're coming up on a 100th anniversary?
We're coming up on it. We're already starting to make some preparations. That's going to be a heck of a year here.
Oh, I bet. Wow. Okay, that's the oldest one I've come across. And so how many trucks do you operate? What kind of freight do you do?
We're what you would consider a small to mid-sized company. Right now, we're operating 120 company trucks. Mm-hmm. We have a flatbed, a specialized flatbed, and then refrigerated grocery division. As far as the makeup goes, we're probably between 70 and 75% refrigerated at this point. It's become the largest portion of what we do, even though it is one of the newest divisions. I mean, we were traditionally a flatbed company all the way up until 2008, 2009, where all we did was just flatbed. And during the recession, there were a few friendly companies that weren't making it through. And we purchased their assets and started servicing their customers. We diversified during tight times. And that was one of the reasons why we came out of that recession as strong as we did. And, our refrigerated division, when it first started, we only had a few refrigerated trucks and a few reefer trailers. And like I said, now it's 70 to 75% of our business.
Wow. Okay. And what regions do you operate in?
We operate primarily the eastern half of the U.S.
Okay. Now, that's really interesting history. And as I understand it, you were a driver as well, not for Nick Strimbu, but you were a driver yourself before moving into the office, correct?
Correct. I spent 12 years in the Army. I was a fuel tanker driver there, Class A, Class B. And then I drove non-CDL for a company for 9 years, where it was about the same footprint, about the eastern half of the U.S., and it was regional driving, hitting car shows, things like that, with an enclosed show cars, motorcycles, and I'd head out from the house on Sunday afternoon, and I get home Friday night.
Okay. All right. But then you moved into the office and took on some different responsibilities before moving over here.
That was a little bit of a funny story. I was actually in CDL school.
Okay.
Whenever this opportunity came up, the recruiter from Nick Strimbu was supposed to come to the school I was attending and do a presentation, and they no-showed us. And come to find out, one of my classmates was pre-hired here. They were looking for a recruiter, and I had at that point 15 years worth of recruiting and sales experience in my background, and contacted Strimbu, sent them a resume. They called me in based off of the advice that one of their drivers who was helping them out during the interim, while they didn't have a recruiter, he was helping them out with some stuff, and he came across my resume and said, "Oh, you definitely got to bring this guy in." So they brought me in for an interview, and come to find out that I had actually worked for him. He was the director of admissions at a trucking school, and I was a senior admissions rep. So he was my old boss 10 years prior. And then when he saw my name, he said, bring him in for an interview, and the rest is history.
Okay. Well, that sounds like destiny.
Yes.
A little bit. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a small world.
Yeah, it is funny how small the world it is. Okay, so you've had experience then on sort of the well, on a variety of different fronts. Understanding CDL school from the inside, and understanding trucking, understanding being a driver. So you've got a really broad base of experience there that you can apply. That must really come in handy. I did want to talk about actually a little bit about what you do with schools, because you guys have got some different programs that you do with your local CDL schools and how you bring in new drivers from those schools. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing there to get new entrants up and running.
Well, we are officially partnered with the three closest CDL training programs in our area. We actually have a sponsored CDL training program where we will contractually send someone to CDL school here in the local area, and then they'll work for us afterwards. Um, we have just recently, as in the last week, been approved for the FMCSA SDAT program.
Mm,
So if you're familiar with that, that's for 18 to 20-year-olds for interstate trucking. So
nice.
we've just gotten approved for that, and we're putting that whole program together and working with our first applicant there. Um, so we do tuition reimbursement with the schools. We do community outreach. So it really is about finding the next generation of drivers and then giving them a hand to actually get into the industry.
Now you also have a buyout program that's part of that, right?
I'm sorry, could you say it again?
You have a buyout program, or you'll buy a
Sure.
driver
Yeah,
out from the
absolutely. That's
school
another
or a
thing we
carry
do.
contract. So that's a bit uncommon. Talk to us about that a little bit.
So a lot of times I have talked with an entry level driver, someone who's been in trucking for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and
Hmm.
they're with one of the super large carriers, and
Hmm.
they may be under contract with them because they paid for their schooling,
Hmm.
and they're looking to make a change for one reason or another.
Hmm.
And if they're a decent fit for what we do here, we will actually buy their contract out and pay off that student loan. That way, that person can go ahead and switch companies and um, not have any of those non-compete agreements that they're fighting in court and stuff like that. We'll just pay that cost off and bring them on board here.
Hmm.
Oh, that's
That's
interesting.
really, yeah, it's
Yeah.
uncommon. I mean, I love the idea because then you're much more likely to have that person stick around the industry. If they find a job that is a better fit for them, then it's going to be a better situation than them grinding it out at that company and just quitting and leaving the industry
Just
altogether
quitting
because
and
they're
leaving the
unhappy.
industry.
Yeah,
We
which none
need
of us want.
drivers in this industry, so not every company is going to be a good fit for what a person's looking for, and they're looking, hey, whatever it takes to get in the industry, and then they realize, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stick this out. Well, this is another option for them. We can actually buy that contract out and get them in a different situation, a different scenario, um, different outfit.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably cheaper than just taking somebody directly out of school and repaying the whole tuition or reimbursing the whole tuition. You're doing sort of a portion of it, right?
Depending upon how long they've been there and what the cost of schools are,
Mm,
it could be a little less expensive to roughly breaking even.
hmm.
But when you help somebody out of a bad situation, um, there's a lot of gratitude and appreciation for that, and it really does help build the loyalty, of the driver to potentially stick around a lot longer than what they might have otherwise because they know that we stuck our neck out for them.
Yeah, it must really build a great relationship with a driver when you sort of go to bat for them that way or give them that option. You must be seeing really good results in terms of the retention of those drivers.
Definitely, and that's part of what I specifically do here is they hired me on as a recruiter, um, but my primary focus, even from the very beginning, was retention.
Mm,
If you can retain your drivers by having better customer service, having a better working relationship with them, you don't have to hire as many. You don't have that revolving door. You're solving those problems from the very beginning. So you start with, you start and end everything with retention in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly what we keep talking about is you solve the retention problem, you don't have to worry about hiring, or you don't have to worry nearly as much about it. Yeah, so I'm going to go in a bit of a different direction with something that is really uncommon that for us in the best fleets, and that is a fleet that has a union representation. So you are, as far as I can see, the first company with a union to make it out of the top 20. So obviously you're doing a lot of things different. I mean, a lot of the union companies that come in, they've got the bare minimum, and they never do very well because they see it as a very adversarial kind of arrangement, and they don't do anything more for their drivers than they absolutely have to. You obviously have got a different approach to that. You guys are having success there. So talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, how it works within your organization, how you approach it, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, we have a collective bargaining agreement with the union, and I suppose most companies that have a CBA look at that as their restraints. They can't go beyond the confines of what is dictated in that contract. We take the exact opposite approach. We look at that contract as the bare minimum. That's the floor. We control the ceiling. So, we make sure that we abide by all aspects of the contract, that we're not going to go below those standards or thresholds. But there is absolutely nothing saying that a company can't go above and beyond those thresholds. And that's the approach that we take. Fact is, most of the pay raises, incentives, things that we've done in the last 3-4 years are not dictated by the contract whatsoever. It's just things that the ownership here, the management here, that we meet on and do the numbers, do the math, do the surveys, find out what the drivers are wanting, and see what we can do and what we can't do. But our drivers really appreciate that because they know at a minimum what the standard is, and then we make it our mission to go above and beyond that standard.
That's an interesting approach. The CBA is the floor, but we control the ceiling. I like that. You've given us a good soundbite. That'll be the clip that we use in the trailer. That is an interesting approach to it, and it must sort of color the negotiation when it comes time to renew that agreement, because you've got this floor, but you've gone so far beyond it. The natural instinct in a lot of unions would be to say, okay, well, everything that you're doing now needs to be baked into the CBA, and then you need to go way beyond that, in the future. But you obviously have got some arrangement or some relationship where you're working together to find something that is going to be working for both sides.
Yeah, it's been a real good relationship. I haven't been in a lot of the negotiations, but I've been involved in the last 3, whether it was a wage reopener or the full contract negotiation. And it's very amicable. We've got a good relationship with our stewards that are the drivers here, our business agent, the union themselves. There's been a lot of trust built up over the years that we're always going to go above and beyond when it's feasible to go above and beyond. And if it's not, we'll say, hey, we can't do this right now, but give us 3-4 months, based off of what's going on with the market. The last major negotiation was smack dab during the middle of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
It was April of 2020.
Wow.
Nobody knew what in the world we were looking at, what we were facing. The future was completely uncertain. None of us had a clue. We didn't have a clue. The market didn't have a clue. Economics, CDC, nobody had a clue. And we were still able to come out with an agreement that, was suitable for the union. And Bill Strimbu made a promise to the union and all the drivers is, hey, I realize this might not be as much as you might want right now, given the circumstances. Nobody really knows what's going on. But on his word, the moment that the market starts to change, we'll start instituting, going above and beyond what we've negotiated in here. And it wasn't but a month later, because I think it was ratified in June, and by the end of June, we had made one of the incentives retroactive back to April. That wasn't supposed to even go into effect until October because the market started to change by the end of June already. And then I think we gave a pay raise in October, another pay raise the following April or May, just keeping pace with what was going on with the industry. And that's one of the nice things about being a smaller to a mid-sized company. We're not so large that we can't react quickly to the market. We can be nimble. And we can be very, very flexible. So, we can act pretty quickly on things.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've found a way to have really strong communication within those groups rather than seeing the union or the CBA as kind of a barrier that separates the groups. You've found ways to kind of remove that and keep communication open.
Communication's huge. When I'm doing a new hire orientation class, my new drivers get sick of hearing me say communication. There is a lot of communication here, and there's still always room for improvement because communication is always the number one issue with any type of organization is effective communication. So we've structured it where there is a lot of systematic communication with our drivers. It's a two-way flow street. Open communication channels. We have driver focus groups. We have union steward meetings, round tables, formal communications, informal communications. There's just a lot that goes on there. So we can really try to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on with our drivers, what our drivers' wants and needs are, what their desires are, even down to truck specs. We're getting ready to start a spec meeting for our truck order for next year. We're, here at the end of this month, we're opening it up to our entire fleet for over 30 days worth of driver feedback input on things that they'd like to see inside the trucks, improvements, amenities, actual hard specs, things like that. And then we'll sit down and get all that hammered out, see what we can do, what we can't do. But it's all about, taking their feedback, honestly evaluating it, and then acting upon it, and then communicating back to them. This is what we did. This is why we did it. This is what we didn't do, and this is why we didn't do it. And that's something that, based off of our conversation earlier this year in reference to the Best Fleets program, was closing the loop on the communication. So that was something that I found that we were lacking a little bit on. So I made it a priority point to always close that loop on a communication flow. It's one thing to act upon something, but then it's another thing to act upon it and then communicate back to them, hey, this is what we did and this is why.
And we've seen, sorry, Mark, I was going to say, we've seen that over and over again. The Best Fleets do close that loop.
Yeah, and that actually touches on some things that I know you wanted to ask about, Trish. So why don't you take it from there?
Certainly does. You mentioned your roundtable lunches.
Yes.
I understand those are with your ownership.
The owners are the ones that are cooking.
Fantastic. So tell us, how does that work? Do you get a handful of drivers or?
Well, we have two different types. We have a formal and then an informal. The formal is scheduled with specific drivers that their peers nominate to come in and sit down with ownership and management and talk about a few things on a regular basis. And then the informal ones that we do, like with us, we do a driver food event every month. Whether it's ordering pizzas or getting the barbecue grill out and doing dogs, burgers. We'll get the Strimbu-Que out, which is a ginormous smoker that should have its own DOT number, and cook it for all the drivers.
Hang on. Say that again. The Strimbu-Que?
The Strimbu-Que. It is a rather.
We're going to need a picture of that, by the way.
I have pictures and video I could send you.
Yeah,
but it's a large smoker that we'll bring in and cook for all the drivers, all the techs in our maintenance shop. They just load that thing up with food. And one thing that Bill definitely likes to do is feed his drivers. But we take those opportunities to chat with the drivers informally. Whoever we can grab who happens to be there, we'll grab 3-4 drivers and sit down and just discuss things. Hey, how's everything going? What do you guys are seeing from a company perspective? What are the trends that you're seeing out there? We're getting frontline feedback from your average Joe, which, pardon me, but that just goes back to my time in the Army. It's direct intelligence right from the front line, from the end user's perspective. So we're getting our drivers' feedback as many ways as we possibly can.
Terrific. And was it from your driver's feedback that you came up with your new pet policy?
It was. The pet policy, the pet program was direct driver feedback. The passenger rider policy was direct driver feedback. Completely respecking and redesigning our trucks to be double bunked full-size condo trucks was direct driver feedback. So, our drivers have a lot to do with where we are at today and the changes that we've made.
Excellent. And did you happen to have an unusual pet go in one of your trucks?
We do have a trucker bunny, Princess Blaney.
What is the name?
Princess Blaney.
Awesome.
Love
and
it.
She has traveled this country, and she has her own Facebook following group. She's got more followers than I do, so she goes everywhere.
Oh, that's fantastic. So let me shift directions just a little bit here.
Sure.
Post-collision, how do you look after your drivers?
Well, we actually have an accident review board where they will have some union representatives in there along with peers. So it's not just the same people over and over again. They'll have a peer group in there, and they review the accident. I mean, first things first, whenever there's an accident, our safety director is usually the first phone call they make, and the first words out of his mouth are you okay? Period, end of story. It starts with, are you okay? And then they'll get into the trucky stuff afterwards. But, between our corporate chaplain offering counseling services, grief counseling, depending upon how bad the accident may be, what that driver is personally going through, to doing an accident review board with, like I said, union representation plus peer review. They're really trying to look out for the driver at every step of the process. Even if the driver is negligent and at fault, they feel that they are being guided through the process. And while the outcome might not be what they'd hoped, seldom does it get nasty. It's a straight up review, and everybody knows what they're getting into when oopsie happens. And it depends on how bad the oopsie is. There's a big difference between, a little oops and a, oh my God, oops.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, it's different if you take out I-95.
Having a bridge collapse, yes, that would be bad.
Big oops.
Yeah.
Big oops.
Well, I can tell you, I found that really refreshing when we were speaking. Whether the other fleets are doing it, they don't always tell us that they're looking after the drivers. So it was wonderful to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of driver advocacy here. That's part of what I do as a retention person is, I advocate for the drivers. I advocate for their point of view. Yes, I work for the company, but our drivers feel comfortable approaching me with things that, they want me to bring up and bring up the management. And, part of what the ownership does, and part of the reason why they keep me around here is, I'm honest with them, and I will hold them to task and hold them to standard. I'm always going to point that out. And I don't win every battle, but usually more often than not, if I bring a driver issue, I get their way for
them.
Interesting.
Another point that you mentioned in your questionnaire was about working holidays and advocating for your drivers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we have, being a refrigerated grocery, it's a 7-day-a-week operation. I mean, we have inbound and outbound freight 7 days a week. Distribution centers, grocery warehouses, they never close. They're always open, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So, yes, we have freight on the weekends, and yes, we have freight on holidays. Now, there's 2 holidays that, unless a driver specifically requests in advance that, hey, keep me moving, because I do have some guys that don't have families, and the holidays is another day to them. Thanksgiving, Christmas, we get everybody back. The rest of the holidays are pretty much working days, and that's what I tell these guys. So what we've done is we have incentivized weekend freight and holiday freight where we don't have to necessarily tell a driver, hey, you're working this upcoming holiday. We have volunteers that will volunteer for it because we financially incentivize it. So the folks that don't mind, working a holiday, they grab all that freight, they make the extra money for it, and the drivers that wanted to be home with their families are home with their families. So, we try to be flexible like that.
So it's a win-win.
It is. It's better to have a volunteer than to have to voluntold somebody.
So I saw a note there that you start kind of with the drivers and figuring out availability, and then you go back to the customers and kind of plan your shipments from there.
Our load planners they are generally booking freight, as far as numbers go, anywhere between 3 to 7 days in advance. Now, we have contract rates where we know we have a specific volume with our core customers, inbound and outbound on a weekly basis. We marry that up with our driver count availability. We meet every single week on that. Okay, who's going to be off next week, knowing what the active driver count is going to be, so that our load planners know exactly how much freight, in addition to what they already have, that they might need to secure as far as load count wise. And a lot of that comes down to, having our drivers communicate with us in advance when they need time off, whether it's a doctor's appointment, whether it's a personal day, whether it's a vacation day. Having that in advance allows us to plan a little more efficiently, so that we're not underbooking freight or overbooking freight. We're trying to match that up with our available driver count on any given day of the week.
Nice.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But that's also very different from a lot of fleets who start with how much can we sell and how can we book as much freight, and we'll fill up our drivers, and if we have to broker some, that we will, but we're going to start with selling as much as we can.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're trying to marry it up with our exact driver count as closely as possible. There are some times where you have an emergency call off, and now we're having to cover loads, but for the most part, they're doing a really good job of just really working that process as efficiently as possible. That's one thing about being a company our size, is we have to be efficient in virtually everything we do, or as efficient as we can be. The larger a company, the more inefficiency that you can have, because you're spreading it across hundreds and hundreds or thousands of drivers. And the tiny companies, any inefficiency whatsoever could put you out of business. We're sort of in that sweet spot between the two, but we still try to be as efficient as we possibly can be, which definitely has been a challenge in this freight market this year.
Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting. We've been talking for a little bit, and before we get to the end, I want to talk a little bit about the Best Fleets to Drive For program specifically, because your fleet was one that really stood out for me when we were going through the scoring this year. And it was one of those where I'm like, wow, these guys have really done a lot, or these guys have really told a different story this year compared to what I had seen from you in the past. And you really looked like you put a lot into some new programs and changing what you were doing, and sort of explaining the things that you're doing. Like, it was certainly no mystery to me when you made the top 20, based on that, because it really jumped out to us when we were doing the scoring. Can you talk a little bit about your process, or how you approached the questionnaire, and sort of what you did this year to go through that process?
Well, the year before this year, so last year, in 2022, that was the first time that we went through the Best Fleets program, and really wasn't sure how the whole thing was put together, how it all worked, how it all tied together. When we got the results back from 2022, I really studied them. One of my personal characteristics is I like to win. I don't like losing. So, once I wasn't in that winner's circle, I made it a little bit of a personal mission of mine to find out why and figure out what we can do to address things. Unfortunately, the ownership here, very like-minded with me. We're always looking for that win-win. And it was something, okay, what do we need to do to make this a better company? Not just for the competition, but obviously for our drivers. And it really, going through that process for the first time, really helped open our eyes to some of the areas that we thought we were doing okay in, but then realized that we really weren't, and that we needed to make some changes. So a lot of the groundwork was already there. It was just expanding and formalizing specific things that we were doing, making it more of a systematic process, so that we have standard operating procedures to fall back on in all these different areas. So it was definitely something that I studied the results. I looked at where we could improve. Looked at areas. The driver feedback, huge. That was we had been doing surveys and things like that. But the amount of driver feedback we got that first year, taking that to heart, looking for short-term, mid-term, long-term things that we can do, that we can work on, and then prioritizing those and putting them in the motion, was definitely something that we took to heart and did. The one thing I didn't do was follow back up with them with hey, this is all we did,
Yeah.
and remind them of it. So lesson learned. Make sure I'm closing that loop on the communication now. But it was a great process. It was really about learning our strengths and weaknesses and being able to choose what kind of company we wanted to be.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear similar things from a lot of fleets, that going through that process, they kind of realize that they're doing things, but they weren't that much formalized, or in some cases not even really conscious of some of the things they're doing, until they go through that exercise, and then they realize, oh, we actually do some of this, but we need to be more aware of it and talk about it, and kind of have a formal, like you call it, standard operating procedure to sort of dictate how we feel and how we handle that situation. And going through that process, often, it's not huge changes to the company, it's small changes here and there, but it's really just clarifying what's already there, or the foundation that's there, and just building
that's
on
a
it a
lot
little
of
bit.
what we felt when we went through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find that interesting every time it comes up. So excellent. So that's going to sort of bring us around into the ending point here. But before we wrap up, any other comments, any last things that you wanted to say about things that you guys do that we haven't talked about, or anything else about your process?
It really comes down to listening to your drivers, creating an environment where they feel comfortable speaking up. Again, getting back to the communication thing, it's been with new drivers, it's been my experience that when someone is new to a company, they don't want to say anything. I'm the new guy here. I don't want to rock the boat. So you almost have to force that communication upon them in order to get the feedback from them, and then they gradually start to feel more comfortable with it. So again, we've got all these the systematic communication approaches between ownership phone calls, management phone calls, all the automated surveys, the driver focus groups, the mentor list, the party chat lines. If any of my flatbed drivers are watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. it really is about that communication, not only just driver to driver and driver to mentor, but also, ownership to driver, driver to ownership. Communication is just the most important thing. Drivers are going to tell you exactly what they want, what's important to them. And then you got to take a look at that and figure out, what can you do, what can't you do, and then prioritize it and make it happen.
That's a really good point about how new employees generally don't want to rock the boat. And you have to figure out how to get them talking comfortably. I mean, we see this a lot, that those new people that come in, like you say, they want to just sort of follow the company line. They want to keep their head down and do their job. But at the same time, they can be a fabulous source of insight because they've got outside perspective. They're fresh eyes looking at everything. And in many cases, they've got a lot of experience in other places. And so they can come in and say, well, here's how these people do it, or here's how this other fleet is doing things. And it can sort of help with that. I mean, we focus on that here on our side in terms of getting input from people on what they've done elsewhere, because there's a lot of good insights out there. So yeah, getting them comfortable, it helps.
Everybody has valuable feedback, whether it's from their past experiences at other companies, or maybe it's something that they don't necessarily understand about us because they're in their first 90 days here, and they're still learning about us as a company, and they don't quite understand something, but they don't want to say anything about it, and it can lead to some frustration. And quite honestly, that can lead to a completely avoidable driver loss. You've got communication. It really does come down to that, and being upfront. I tell all my drivers I am an answer guy. I have most of the answers. If I don't have an answer, I can put you in front of the person that will have the answer. And if it's one of those situations where I have to walk up to the owner's office, ask a question, get an answer, and get back to you, I will do that immediately, because you might not always like the answer I give you, but you are going to get an answer. At least then you know exactly what you're facing and what you're dealing with, so you can make informed decisions. And my drivers really do appreciate that.
Yeah,
sure they do.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great place to close this out. So thanks very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing what you guys are coming up to in the fall.
We're getting ready.
All right. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for listening to the podcast today.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Trish.